Hello dear chess friends. Now I would like to show one typical attacking game of former world champion Michael Tal, who like me was born and lived all his life in Riga. Many people see certain connection between my chess style and the style of the world champion Tal, but since I myself never became world champion, I prefer not to think too much about those connections. Still, in the current case, I can note that I myself had a similar attacking game. So first I will show you Tal's game and then my game, and we'll see how similar they are. So the game that I'm going to show, Tal played against the other former world champion Boris Spassky, but they played it in Tilburg 1980 when they were no longer world champions, neither of them, and basically when maybe their best successes were already behind them. Still, I remember those times very well because I started playing chess in '79 and Tal played some great tournaments in '79, so he greatly influenced Latvian chess in general. And this game that I'm going to show, I first saw in Riga Chess magazine in 1980, and of course it made a great impression to me. So, okay, let's see the game now. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Ruy Lopez opening. I remember those days when I started playing chess. I was told that if you want to study Ruy Lopez opening, you should see the games of Capablanca and Karpov. Okay, it's true that they both won wonderful strategical games, but in fact I think Michael Tal contributed to this opening not less than them. Just that sometimes his games were hard to understand because it's a very strategical opening itself, and in fact Michael Tal played very good strategical chess, but there would be then so much tactics in his games that his contemporaries did not really follow his style. Okay, let us try to follow his style at least. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop b7, rook e1, e5, bishop b3, d6, c3, short castle. Okay, a very typical position of Ruy Lopez. Now White normally chooses between d4, which allows bishop g4 pinning the knight, so now White has to close the center immediately with d5, or somewhat slower but probably sounder move h3. So it's important not to allow that pin at all, and next move would be d4. So now Black has different plans to continue, and one of them is rather amusing one, which is a Breyer system, which is knight b8. Okay, normally it's not advisable to make the, let's say, to retreat your pieces before you finished your development, starting maneuvering. Like, and the second question comes, why didn't Black think about this on move 2 to play d6 and knight d7? Why now was the c6 square so bad for the knight? Okay, the answer is that Ruy Lopez is a very complex opening. White also played with his bishop to b5, then a4, then b3, also lost some tempi. So, but this is a type of position where Black pawn should be on c5. So in order to let the pawn the way to c5, Black has to move his knight. So therefore they normally play either knight e5, bishop c2, c5, or knight b8 is an alternative. Okay, so d4, knight d7, knight d2, bishop b7. Another important moment. Normally White's plan is to bring the knight to g3, and therefore now the fight starts against this plan. So Obviously knight cannot go to f1 because white would lose the pawn on e4. So bishop c2, protecting this pawn and preparing knight f1. So now rook e8, and okay, in this position Tal played knight f1. There are different plans for white also to keep the knight on d2. So to play, for example, a4, bishop f8, and now knight f1 is not possible because black will take the pawn on d4 and then on e4. So the plans are bishop d3, c6, and then the other bishop would be developed on b2. Okay, that's a different line, so not much to be said about this, but somehow black achieved equal game in the most of Grandmaster games recently, so therefore I still prefer this classical plan of bringing knight to g3. So knight f1 now, bishop f8, knight g3, and black plays g6 because normally g7 is a good square for bishop. Well, now basically black's plan is to play quick bishop g7 and then somewhere to play d5 and break in the center. So therefore white starts playing on the queen side in order to try to prevent this plan. So for example, after bishop g7 he would play bishop d3, force c6 more or less, and then afterwards d5 would not be so strong. So black can use the fact that white has played a4, so he plays c5. Now it's most common to close the center. For example, if he tries not to close the center but play something like b3, black can, first of all, black can this b4, and after takes, this opening center is quite favorable for black because now the knight on g3 is not a good piece. So that means that in fact white doesn't have many active ideas now, so the main plan is to close the center. And when white closes the center, it turns out that black has one disadvantage in this position, which tells in many games of this Breyer defense. His bishop is on d7. So, for example, if we just make an experiment, if we bring this bishop, let's say, to d7 and the knight on b6, then it would be better come to play later on for black on the king side, for example a5, knight c8, and so on. But black needs some time to get this. So therefore here he already chooses some other plans, and one of them is c4. It's very important to play c4 now, when white has already played a4. If the pawn of white was on a2 still, then after c4 white would probably be able to play b3. And for example, black cannot allow such structure, then this c4 pawn is very weak. White can try to get with one knight, then the other knight. I had some games like this as white, which I won. But when the pawn is on a4, it's the other way around, because b3 would only lead to the weakness of c3 pawn, and then black would have an excellent game himself. Okay, so after c4, white switches again to the king's flank, and that uses the fact that by closing the center in d5 he got some little space advantage. Okay, now Now Spassky played h6. I think at the moment I'm not going to criticize this move, but after bishop e3 he played somewhat a wrong move, which is rook b8. The point is that in those positions white almost never threatens to take on b5, because the opening is always favorable for black at the moment, because white's main activity goes on the king side, at the moment at least. So black can think about bringing rook on b8, but much later, not now. Okay, later on we will look at my game against Baramidze, which he played queen c7, but in my opinion the best move here is knight c5. Okay, more about this later, but rook b8 seems to be a little bit like a tempo loss, and let's see how, in what a fantastic manner Tal uses it. So he plays queen d2, h5. If black tries not to put the pawn on h5, but plays king h7, white has a dangerous plan of knight h2 and then knight coming to g4. And it's not advisable for black to exchange knights on g4, because then white gets this plan f3, king f2, rook h1, and winning the h7 pawn, h6 pawn. Well, so therefore, when knight is on h2, black normally plays h5 anyway, so no wonder that Spassky decided to play it immediately. And now, very important move in whole strategical concept of Michael Tal. And I must say that during 30 years I failed even to understand the depth of this concept. So he plays knight g5. Well, we can all see that the idea behind knight g5 is sometimes to play f4. But in fact, in this case, the idea is much deeper. Black has lost some time with this rook b8 move, so he has no real time to set up the position like knight c5 and then takes knight d7, because white will already start the attacking on the king's side with rook f1. So what black has to do now is, and this is what Spassky did, is to play knight h7, changing the knights. But once the knight is changed, black has lost practically all his active possibilities, because the best active plan for black in those positions would be to play on the king side with both, on the queen side with both knights. Now one knight is changed, and white can start the double attack on both king and queen sides, and black can only try to be prepared for this attack, but black has no counter-attacking plans. So now rook f1. So Spassky played king g8. In my opinion, bishop g7 was slightly more stubborn, but okay, that would also be dangerous. So here is the only moment where I think I should criticize Tal a little bit, or at least to show my surprise with the move that Tal made, king h1. In my opinion, it was already everything set up for playing f4. King on g1 is perfectly okay. In fact, in some positions when black plays h4, there is a very good plan for knight coming through h1 to f2 and then to g4. So I really don't understand why not f4, but okay. I cannot ask Michael Tal about this, because unfortunately he's already 20 years not in this world, but in my opinion f4 was stronger than king h1. Okay, so Tal played king h1. Sorry, the knight is on g3, of course. So f4 is stronger than king h1. So So after king h1, Spassky played bishop g7. A takes b5 in my opinion was not necessary yet. It could be played a few moves later, but okay, finally Tal played f4. And okay, black normally has to take this pawn because otherwise white gets f5, all space advantage, and the plan can be bishop g5, f6, bishop f8, bishop h6, then bishop takes, and mate. Okay, looks like a too simple plan, but I can say it's much more difficult to do something against this plan than just to realize this plan on the practice. So that's why black has to take on f4. Okay, so white took. Spassky played queen e7. Because if he plays knight e5, bishop g5 is what white wants to do. So now, if queen goes, then bishop f6, and then once again white just has a simple plan of exchanging, playing queen g5, and then knight f5 will be made. Once again, difficult to see any kind of reasonable defense against this. So that means that when bishop g5 is played, black should play f6, and then bishop would go back. It seems that black at the moment has defended, but now the question comes what to do against this plan knight e2, knight d4, and knight coming to e6. Oh, I don't see a clear answer to that. So therefore, Spassky cannot put his knight on e5 any longer, so he has to protect the f6 square, and he plays queen e7. So now Tal plays bishop g5. In my opinion, it was still better for Spassky to play queen f8 and try to set up his defense there. White is obviously already better, but at least some accuracy is required. I think rook a7 is a very good move to paralyze black's defense. So black cannot play rook a8 because he loses the bishop. So his only reasonable move is bishop c5. And now theoretically white already can start with tactics, but black probably gets some compensation for the queen and some activity. So I'm not even sure whether I can really recommend this as white's way to play this e5 and this combination. So it's a typical case when tactics might be unsound when it's too early. So probably the right thing is once again to play bishop f6 and try to change these bishops and continue all this kind of positional pressure. And I think then white's advantage is really quite serious. Still, I like more queen a8. In the game, Spassky lost relatively quickly. He played queen e5. Okay, now Tal repeated once, so I would still play queen f8, of course. Queen e5, and he played rook f3. Now I failed to even say how Spassky could defend in this game. Okay, he played rook a8, rook f1, rook f8. Okay, so far the game was strategical, but if you judge only by strategical means, we would think that black is doing all right, hasn't done anything wrong in this game. No, he has done something wrong. What is most amazing about this game is one cannot even say clearly what black has done wrong, because his play looked logical. But what we have now, white has concentrated all his pieces on the king's side, thinking about attacking black's king. Meanwhile, black has totally useless bishop on b7 and totally useless rook on a8. But how to use it? Okay, the answer comes that sometimes in the attack, when you are just attacking, you can make normal moves, improve the position of your pieces, but always some moment comes when probably you have to sacrifice. well, it's not sacrifice for sacrificing, it's in this case it's sacrificing for opening black king. So giving the knight for a pawn is nothing comparing to the fact that king opens, queen has to go to e8 where it will not be able even to participate in defense, because after queen g3 white will play rook f3, rook a1, bishop d1, and black would lose his queen. So queen has to go to e8, and now let's see the position a little bit. Formally speaking, sorry, rook is on f1. Formally speaking, black has an extra knight. But in reality, look at black king. He's under attack. He's only defended by one single bishop. White is attacking with queen, two rooks, bishop. So, big material advantage for whom? For black or for white? In this case, it's for white. And in order to complete the attack, white plays e5, opens the file also for the second bishop. So now white's material advantage becomes decisive. In this case, material advantage, by material advantage I mean the material that participates in the attacking black king. So d takes c5, bishop h6. Well, of course, now no defense can be suggested, so we just see the finish of the game. Rook a6, takes. So black's last hope is to bring the rook to defense, but d6 closes this sixth rank. So now one king against queen and two rooks. Okay, the pawn came to defend the king, but if it's two rooks and queen against the pawn, you can give up one of the rooks for this pawn. Rook g5 check. And of course, if f takes g5, queen h6, king g8, queen h7, it's mate. So, well, normally I would expect anybody to resign here, but for some reason Spassky played king f7, bishop g6, king e6. Okay, now normal would be just to take the queen, but Tal was sadistic in this game. He played bishop f5, king f7, queen d1, insisting on not winning the queen but on giving mate. For example, after f takes g5, queen takes h5, king f6, queen h6, king f7, the mate would be bishop e6. But Spassky did not want to get brilliantly mated. He preferred to play rook h8, after which finally Tal was forced to take his queen. And okay, after rook takes e8, I think it was queen takes h5, rook d8, rook g7, king takes d6, queen f7, and finally Spassky resigned because, okay, how can you play with knight and bishop against the queen when queen is also supported by two active rooks? Of course, black is totally lost. Okay, so what I want to say about this game is that in fact it's a purely strategical game. White did the correct exchange of one knight and then concentrated its forces on the black's king side, but the fine tactical end just completed this strategy. Well, nowadays in Breyer system they play much better with black, so it's difficult to win the game so easily. But when I had a game against David Baramidze in Bundesliga 2 years ago, I managed to use very similar motives, although in a much more complicated situation. So I'm happy that in a way I could use Michal Tal's motives. So now let's see my game against Baramidze from Bundesliga 2010.